They are moving the Panzer Division here.
But the aerial report says otherwise, Commandant.
This intercept confirms the movement.
January 1945, southern Germany. A concrete airfield lies silent under a low winter sky. Inside a draft-filled operations room, engineers in worn coats lean over reconnaissance summaries and intercepted reports. The war has turned against them. Fuel is scarce. Aluminum is rationed. Test flights are fewer now. But one report does not fit the expected pattern. It describes an aircraft without a propeller. No piston engine. No familiar silhouette. Just speed. Clean acceleration. A straight wing cutting cold air. At first, it is dismissed as exaggeration. American pilots, after all, were thought to be methodical, cautious. Their air doctrine relied on numbers, not novelty. Germany had flown the world's first jet years earlier. German scientists had broken that barrier alone. Yet more fragments arrive. British intelligence chatter. Technical references. A name surfaces quietly, Bell. Then another, Lockheed. Test flights. Production plans. Runways prepared far from Europe's reach. In the stillness of the room, certainty begins to thin. If the Americans are already flying jets, then time itself has collapsed. The technological distance Germany believed protected it no longer exists. And with that realization, a deeper question settles in. How did the balance shift without them noticing? By the time Europe slid into war, Germany already believed it had touched the future. On the morning of August 27, 1939, days before the invasion of Poland, a small experimental aircraft lifted from a grass airfield near Rostock. It was compact, unglamorous, almost fragile. Yet the Heinkel He-178 was propelled not by a propeller, but by a jet engine. For a brief flight, lasting barely 10 minutes, Germany became the first nation on Earth to fly a jet-powered aircraft. The significance was understood immediately by engineers, not politicians. Ernst Heinkel's design team, working in near isolation, had proven that air combat could escape the physical limits of piston engines. No propeller torque, no mechanical drag. Speed was no longer tied to blade efficiency. The jet promised altitude, velocity, and tactical surprise beyond anything flying at the time. Yet even at this moment of technical triumph, a critical pattern emerged. The aircraft flew. The leadership did not come. Adolf Hitler showed little interest. The Luftwaffe hierarchy, focused on immediate war needs, saw the jet as an engineering curiosity, too immature, too unreliable, too late to matter. Germany's war doctrine still revolved around proven concepts: dive bombers, tactical air support, and mass fighter coverage for rapid ground advances. But within Germany's research institutes, the implications were unmistakable. By 1941, jet development accelerated under wartime urgency. The Junkers Jumo 004, the world's first mass-producible turbojet engine, entered testing. It was a breakthrough born of constraint, designed with low-grade alloys due to chronic shortages of heat-resistant metals like nickel and chromium. The result was an engine that could be built quickly but not last long. To German engineers, this trade-off was acceptable. They were not designing peacetime machines. They were designing weapons for a short, decisive war. By 1942, the Messerschmitt Me 262 emerged as the embodiment of that belief. Faster than any Allied fighter, capable of exceeding 540 miles per hour, armed with heavy 30mm cannons that could shred bombers in seconds. On paper, it was unbeatable, and in German technical circles, it reinforced a dangerous assumption. Germany believed it was years ahead. This belief was not arrogance without cause. British jet development under Frank Whittle had stalled repeatedly due to funding, skepticism, and industrial hesitation. Early American efforts appeared even further behind. Before 1941, U.S. military aviation prioritized long-range bombers and reliable piston fighters, not experimental propulsion systems. From Berlin and Augsburg, the Atlantic looked wide and slow. German intelligence reports throughout 1941 and early 1942 suggested that Allied jet work was fragmented, underfunded, and largely theoretical. There was no evidence of operational prototypes, no sign of urgency, no proof that the industrial momentum necessary for jet production even existed. German scientists drew a quiet conclusion. Even if the Allies understood the jet's potential, they could not match Germany's head start before the war was decided. This perception shaped everything that followed. Jet programs were protected, but not prioritized above immediate battlefield needs. Resources remained split. Production lines struggled under Allied bombing. Skilled labor vanished into infantry replacements. Fuel shortages limited test flights. And yet, confidence endured. The Me-262 did not need to exist in large numbers, German planners believed. It only needed to arrive first. By 1943, however, cracks began to form. Allied bombers were appearing in overwhelming numbers. American formations flew deeper, higher, and with improving escort coverage. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was now defensive, reacting instead of shaping the air war. Jet fighters were no longer future weapons. They were becoming necessities. Still, the central assumption held. Germany might be bleeding, but technologically, it remained unmatched. What German scientists did not yet see, what intelligence had not yet confirmed, was that across the ocean, under layers of secrecy and industrial mobilization, a different kind of response was taking shape. One not driven by early invention, but by scale, speed, and coordination. And when that realization began to surface, it would arrive not as a dramatic announcement, but as an unsettling line buried in an intelligence report. A line that suggested America was no longer behind. It was already flying. Across the Atlantic, the United States entered the war with a very different relationship to jet propulsion. Before 1941, American aviation doctrine was conservative by design. Reliability mattered more than novelty. Range mattered more than speed. The U.S. Army Air Corps placed its faith in piston engines refined to their limits, turbo superchargers, high-altitude performance, long endurance. The future, as most American planners saw it, belonged to incremental improvement, not radical leaps. Jet propulsion existed in American laboratories, but only at the margins. It was a theoretical curiosity, a technical risk. Funding was thin. Priority was elsewhere. Then Europe burned. In Britain, Frank Whittle's ideas, once dismissed, had survived just long enough to matter. By 1940, British engineers were flying the Gloucester E.28/39, proving that a jet aircraft could leave the ground, climb, and return intact. The aircraft was crude. Its range was short, but it flew. And Britain understood something Germany did not. They could not build enough of them. British industry, under constant bombardment, lacked the capacity to scale jet production quickly. The engines were delicate, the metallurgy demanding. The war left little margin for error. Britain needed help. In September 1941, a small group of British officers crossed the Atlantic carrying more than blueprints. They carried trust. The Whittle turbojet, fully documented, openly shared, was handed to the Americans. It was an extraordinary transfer. No secrecy, no hedging. The assumption was simple. If anyone could industrialize the jet, it was the United States. The reaction inside American industry was immediate. General Electric, already experienced with turbo superchargers, recognized the similarity at once. The Whittle design was not perfect, but it was workable. Engineers disassembled it, measured it, tested it. Within months, the first American-built jet engine, the IA, was running on a test stand. The pace shocked even those inside the program. This was not a scientific breakthrough. It was an industrial one. Where German engineers struggled with shortages, American factories expanded. Where Germany refined designs endlessly, American firms accepted imperfections and planned to fix them later, at scale. Materials that were scarce in Europe were available in bulk in the United States. Fuel quality was consistent. Skilled labor was abundant. Electricity uninterrupted. In 1942, the U.S. Army Air Forces issued a quiet request: build an aircraft around this engine. No fanfare. No urgency visible to the outside world. Bell Aircraft was selected. The result was the XP-59 Airacomet, an aircraft born not from desperation, but from curiosity and preparation. Its performance would later disappoint. It was slow, underpowered, difficult to handle, but did not need to be good. It only needed to fly. And in October 1942, in the California desert, it did. The flight was brief, carefully controlled, surrounded by secrecy. The aircraft wore fake propellers on its nose when transported to mislead observers. Test pilots spoke little. Reports were classified. Even many within the USAF did not know the program existed. This silence was deliberate. American planners did not intend to rush jets into combat. They understood the risks. Jet engines consumed fuel rapidly. Reliability remained questionable. Maintenance crews were unfamiliar with the technology. Introducing such an aircraft prematurely could cost pilots lives and reveal capabilities to the enemy before they were ready. So the program expanded quietly. While Bell struggled, Lockheed was already thinking ahead. Clarence Kelly Johnson Skunk Works took the lessons learned from the XP-59 and began designing something more refined. Something faster. Something operational. The P-80 Shooting Star emerged not as an experiment, but as a weapon intended for war. Its engine, the British-derived but American-built Halford H-1, offered greater thrust and reliability. The airframe was clean, purposeful, designed with combat in mind. By 1943, American jet pilots were training in secret. By 1944, production lines were forming. None of it announced. None of it celebrated. And in Germany, assumptions remained unchanged. German intelligence focused on what they could see: piston-engine bombers in massive formations, fighters escorting them, relentless, predictable. Jets, they believed, remained their exclusive domain, a fragile advantage, but an advantage nonetheless. They did not imagine American jets were already flying. They did not imagine American factories were already learning how to build them in numbers. And they certainly did not imagine that when the truth emerged, it would come not as a rumor, but as a technical report quietly placed on a desk, forcing German scientists to confront a reality they had never planned for. Because when the monopoly breaks, the war changes direction. And the angles of that realization, human, technological, strategic, were about to collide. At the heart of every jet aircraft was a problem far more complex than speed. It was heat. German engineers had reached the jet age first, but they arrived without the materials to sustain it. The Junkers Jumo 004 engine, which powered the Me-262, was a technical compromise from the start. Germany lacked sufficient supplies of high-temperature alloys like nickel, chromium, and molybdenum, materials critical for turbine blades that could survive prolonged heat and stress. By 1943, Allied bombing and resource shortages made these materials even scarcer. As a result, German jet engines were designed to be expendable. The WWII had an operational lifespan of roughly 25 to 50 hours, sometimes less. Turbine blades warped, bearings failed, flames licked through housings never meant to endure them. Engineers knew this. Pilots felt it every time they advanced the throttle too quickly and destroyed an engine in seconds. Fuel was another constraint. Jet engines demanded consistent, high-quality fuel, yet Germany was running on synthetics derived from coal. Variations in fuel quality caused instability, flameouts, and unpredictable performance. Across the Atlantic, American engineers faced the same physics, but not the same limitations. When the United States received Frank Whittle's centrifugal jet engine concepts from Britain, it also possessed vast metallurgical research facilities, stable access to raw materials, and time. The Bell XP-59 Airacomet was underpowered and imperfect, but it was reliable. The Lockheed P-80, developed rapidly afterward, benefited from improved alloys, precision machining, and standardized fuel supplies. Where Germany designed jets to survive scarcity, America designed them to endure use. In Germany, the jet was a scientist's triumph and a pilot's burden. Engineers viewed the Me-262 as proof of intellectual superiority, a machine that validated years of theoretical work in aerodynamics and propulsion. But fighter pilots experienced it differently. They climbed into aircraft that demanded restraint, patience, and constant vigilance. Throttle movements had to be slow. Engine temperatures had to be watched. Takeoffs were long and vulnerable. Landings were worse. Pilots trusted piston engines because they understood them. Jets, by contrast, were temperamental. When they failed catastrophically. This created tension. Engineers blamed pilots for mishandling delicate engines. Pilots blamed engineers for designing aircraft unfit for combat conditions. Both were partly right. Neither could change the reality of war pressing inward from all sides. In the United States, this divide existed, but it was narrower. Test pilots worked closely with engineers at places like Muroc Army Airfield. Feedback loops were faster. Failures were documented, not hidden. When engines failed, replacements were available. When designs needed revision, factories adjusted. American pilots flying early jets were cautious, but they were not desperate. They were not flying from bombed airfields under fuel rationing. They were part of a system still expanding. The difference was not courage or intelligence. It was margin. Germany's jet program was born into a collapsing industrial base. By 1944, aircraft factories were dispersed, hidden in forests, tunnels, and underground facilities. Production lines were fragmented. Skilled labor was scarce. Forced labor filled the gaps, often untrained, often exhausted. Precision suffered. Each Me-262 required extraordinary effort. Every engine was precious. Every airframe represented a gamble against bombing raids, supply interruptions, and transport failures. Jets were produced, but never in the numbers planners imagined when the designs were first drawn. America, meanwhile, treated jets as a future problem to be solved at scale. Even while the war was still being fought with piston aircraft, U.S. industry prepared for what came next. Factories that produced thousands of B-24s and P-51s could be retooled. Supply chains stretched across a continent untouched by bombing. Universities, corporations, and the military collaborated openly. When the P-80 entered production, it did so within a system already optimized for mass output. The aircraft itself mattered, but so did the confidence that it could be built again and again and again. German intelligence observed numbers. They counted aircraft. They measured output, but they misunderstood capacity. They believed America was still catching up. In reality, the gap was quietly widening, measured not just in machines, but in endurance, adaptability, and time. And in that widening space, Crucial information failed to cross borders, failed to reach desks, failed to challenge assumptions, until the intelligence gaps themselves became impossible to ignore. By the middle years of the war, jet technology was no longer only a question of physics. It had become a question of command. In Germany, authority narrowed as the war tightened. Adolf Hitler involved himself directly in aircraft development, often overriding engineers and Air Force officers. His fixation on multi-role weapons shaped decisions at critical moments. The Me-262, conceived as a pure interceptor, was delayed by demands that it serve as a bomber. Engineering schedules bent to political will. Test pilots waited. Production lines stalled. In contrast, American air power developed under a layered command structure. The U.S. Army Air Forces allowed specialists to specialize. Engineers reported to engineers. Pilots flew what they were given. Generals focused on logistics and timelines rather than redesign. When the Bell XP-59 first flew in October 1942, it was unimpressive by combat standards. But it was allowed to be exactly what it was, a test platform. No propaganda followed. No public announcement. No pressure to make it decisive before it was ready. That difference mattered. German jet programs were burdened with expectation. American jet programs were protected by patience. Leadership shaped velocity. And velocity, in wartime technology, was everything. The gap between decision and execution widened quietly. German scientists were not ignorant, but they were isolated. Their understanding of Allied jet progress came through fragments. Intercepted reports, reconnaissance photographs, vague intelligence summaries passed through military channels already saturated with bad news. They knew Britain had Whittle engines. They assumed America was still learning for Britain. What they did not see was scale. They did not see entire American factories dedicated solely to metallurgy research. They did not see thousands of engineers working on turbine blade alloys without fear of bombing. They did not see test aircraft written off without consequence, replaced by improved versions weeks later. Within Germany, jet engineers worked under constant disruption. Facilities were relocated underground. Power shortages slowed testing. Materials were rationed. Reports were filtered before reaching Berlin. So when rumors emerged, unconfirmed at first, that American jets were flying at multiple bases, skepticism dominated. The United States, German scientists believed, lacked urgency. It had not faced defeat in the air. It did not need jets yet. That belief hardened into assumption. And assumptions survive until evidence arrives. Jet propulsion pushed scientists into uncomfortable territory. The line between innovation and desperation blurred. In Germany, jet development became a race against collapse. Engineers were ordered to deliver miracles with diminishing resources. The science remained sound. The context did not. Young technicians replaced experienced ones sent to the front. Decisions were rushed. Safety margins shrank. In America, science moved under a different pressure. Not survival, but supremacy. Engineers were shielded from immediate battlefield consequences. Failures were acceptable. Time could be spent solving problems instead of hiding from air raids. Both sides worked under total war. But total war did not look the same. For German scientists, jets were salvation. For American scientists, they were inevitability. That moral difference shaped outcomes. One side chased rescue. The other built foundations. By late 1943, German intelligence began to close its gaps. Reports aligned. Photographs confirmed unfamiliar aircraft shapes. Pilot chatter mentioned strange silhouettes. The picture sharpened. Jets were no longer exclusively German. And in laboratories across the Reich, disbelief began to shift, slowly, reluctantly, into alarm, as the realization formed that the technological advantage they had relied upon was slipping beyond reach. The winter of 1944 brought a chilling clarity over German research bunkers. Snow lay heavy across the forests surrounding Piedmont, the airfield silent, but for the occasional distant drone of Allied bombers. Inside, a small cadre of engineers huddled over hastily translated intelligence reports. The numbers made no sense. Flight tests, engine specifications, operational readiness. America's jets were not a rumor. They were real, airborne, and advancing faster than even the most optimistic German projections. Bell's XP-59 Airacomet had taken to the sky months earlier, and now whispers confirmed that Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star was nearing operational deployment. Every line of the intelligence documents was a blow to the certainty that German jet supremacy would last the remainder of the war. The engineers knew the Me-262 was cutting edge, but their own production bottlenecks, material shortages, and the relentless pressure of Allied bombing had slowed development. Reports from reconnaissance pilots painted a clear picture. America's jets could climb faster, sustain longer flights, and were being built in numbers that German scientists could scarcely believe. The realization sank in slowly. It was not merely a technological surprise, it was a strategic alarm. The Germans had expected the Allies to struggle for years to field an operational jet. Now, the horizon was changing overnight. By January 1945, internal memos circulated between the Luftwaffe, High Command, and research labs. One engineer noted in frustration, "We are racing a ghost, one that we cannot touch until it appears over our skies." Tactical plans that had relied on Me-262 dominance were suddenly tenuous. The psychological impact was immediate. Confidence waned. Discussions became more guarded, theories more speculative. Every report hinted at the same unnerving truth. The United States had transformed the theoretical into the practical. It was not just the technology that shocked them. It was the scale and speed of implementation. Germany had labored under shortages, the threat of bombing, and an overstretched military, while the American industrial machine had mobilized with terrifying efficiency. Factories, fuel, and trained pilots were available in quantities German strategists could scarcely imagine. The XP-59 and P-80 were harbingers of a new reality, one that German scientists had assumed would remain distant until the war's end. As February approached, test flights over Nevada and California had already proven sustained flight, reliability, and the integration of jet propulsion with tactical aircraft design. Meanwhile, German engineers continued to wrestle with overheating turbines, substandard alloys, and constant Allied raids that destroyed factories and delayed production. The juxtaposition could not have been starker. One document summarized it coldly. "Our technology is ahead, but our capacity is not. Their capacity is extraordinary, our advantage fleeting." The winter air over Piedmont felt heavier that year. German scientists, who had once imagined themselves at the apex of aeronautical achievement, now faced a humbling reality. The jets of the future were no longer solely theirs. A new era in aerial warfare was arriving, faster than anticipated, and Germany had little time to respond. The next months would test not only machines, but the nerve of those who had built them. The reports concluded with grim clarity. American jet fighters were not theoretical, not experimental in isolation. They were operational, and soon they would appear where it mattered most, over Europe's skies in combat. Spring 1945 arrived over Germany with an acrid taste of inevitability. In the war rooms of Berlin and the scattered research bunkers, the silence of disbelief had given way to tense urgency. Reports of American jet operations were no longer abstract intelligence. They were confirmed by reconnaissance, captured pilots, and intercepted communications. The Luftwaffe command convened meetings that crackled with frustration, anger, and a subtle, creeping fear. At Piedmont, engineers pored over blueprints, recalculating the limitations of Mi-262s under fuel shortages and Allied bombings. Each figure on a document, a speed, a climb rate, a range, served as a reminder of Germany's slipping advantage. The P-80s were flying, and they were fast, reliable, and produced in numbers that German leadership had once considered impossible. Tactical dominance, once presumed certain, had become a fleeting illusion. Inside the high command, discussions turned heated. Generals argued over the potential deployment of jets in last-ditch defensive operations, but every plan was constrained by a critical reality. Germany could not build enough aircraft, train enough pilots, or secure enough fuel to match the Allies' accelerating pace. Hitler's insistence on centralized control and perfectionism delayed production decisions. Meanwhile, American jets, still few in number, represented a symbolic victory in technological momentum, proof that Germany's assumptions about Allied incapacity were catastrophically wrong. By April, scattered reports described engagements between the Luftwaffe and newly deployed American jets. Pilots who had flown the Mi-262 noted its superiority in firepower and climb compared to piston-driven Allied planes, yet even they could not ignore the P-80's speed and resilience. Strategic plans that once relied on a slow Allied adaptation to jets were now obsolete. German engineers recorded their disbelief in terse, formal language. The enemy has achieved in months what we could not in years. The shock was as psychological as it was technical. Scientists who had once prided themselves on being at the forefront of aeronautical innovation felt the weight of helplessness. Factories had been destroyed, materials were scarce, and Allied bombings continued to disrupt supply lines. Every German jet that reached operational status was a victory, yet it was insufficient to counteract the broader imbalance. Even as Berlin faced its final days, the reality of American jet capability lingered like a phantom. The United States had demonstrated that industrial power, combined with scientific ingenuity and strategic clarity, could achieve what had seemed impossible. For German scientists, the realization was humbling. Their own breakthroughs had been eclipsed not by failure of intellect, but by the relentless speed of American mobilization. The winter of disbelief had ended. By the time the Allies crossed the Rhine and advanced on German cities, it was clear that jets no longer symbolized German dominance. They were markers of a rapidly closing technological gap. Disbelief had hardened into urgency, and urgency into resignation. The German war effort, already collapsing under multiple pressures, now faced a stark truth. The skies they had once hoped to control were slipping irrevocably into enemy hands. In this crucible, the stage was set for the final reckoning. The Mi-262, once a symbol of German ingenuity, now stood as a reminder of what had been lost, not in brilliance, but in timing, resources, and strategic foresight. The future of aerial warfare had arrived, and Germany was already behind. By May 1945, the war in Europe had ended, but the echoes of technological rivalry lingered in the shattered factories and bombed-out airfields of Germany. The once proud research centers at Piedmont, Darmstadt, and other sites were overrun, their archives seized by advancing Allied forces. Engineers, scientists, and pilots, many of them still reeling from the realization of American jet advancements, were interrogated, cataloged, and in many cases, recruited for post-war programs under Operation Paperclip and similar Allied initiatives. The Mi-262, which had promised to redefine air combat, had arrived too late to alter the war's course. Its limited deployment, hampered by fuel shortages, production bottlenecks, and Allied air superiority, had rendered it a tactical marvel with minimal strategic effect. German reports estimated only a few hundred jets had seen combat before the Reich's collapse. Meanwhile, captured intelligence confirmed that the United States and Britain had already tested and produced operational jet aircraft in quantity sufficient to threaten Axis air dominance. For German scientists, the aftermath was a bitter blend of pride and frustration. Technical ingenuity had not been the limiting factor. Their designs were groundbreaking, but logistical and strategic failings had rendered their work largely moot. Internal Luftwaffe assessments, later declassified, noted that even the most advanced prototypes could not compensate for the crushing disparity in resources and production capacity. Every successful Me-262 sortie underscored a paradox. Brilliance without backing is fragile. In the United States, the arrival of German technology and expertise fueled a new wave of aviation research. Reports from captured German engineers emphasized metallurgy techniques, jet engine designs, and aerodynamic innovations that American scientists integrated into programs such as the P-80 Shooting Star and future jet projects. The intelligence gathered also confirmed that German calculations of Allied jet capability had been far too conservative, misjudgments that had contributed to overconfidence within Nazi command structures. The war's end left the skies forever changed. Jet propulsion, once the province of a few visionary laboratories, became the defining axis of aerial power. German engineers, who had marveled at the speed and efficiency of American test programs, now saw their work incorporated into a global aviation landscape that would shape the Cold War. The lesson was stark. Technological mastery alone cannot secure victory without the industrial and logistical means to exploit it fully. Amid the ruins of Berlin and the quiet of Peenemund's abandoned runways, the German scientists confronted a hard truth. Their disbelief at America's jet capabilities had been the opening act in a narrative of irreversible change. The Allies' success had not only foreshadowed the future of aviation, it had also underscored the limits of wartime hubris. The stage was set for a post-war era defined by speed, altitude, and the relentless pursuit of aerial superiority. German innovation would survive, but the context in which it had once promised dominance was gone forever. As the rubble of German cities smoldered and Allied forces established control, the fate of jet aviation shifted from the battlefield to laboratories and boardrooms. The Me-262, once a symbol of potential German air dominance, became a subject of fascination and study. Allied engineers and scientists meticulously examined every component: the Jumo 004 engines, the swept-wing design, the metallurgy innovations, and the flight control systems. Captured data was cataloged and integrated into the burgeoning jet programs of the United States and Britain. The P-80 Shooting Star, already operational in limited numbers before Germany's surrender, now accelerated into full production. Lessons gleaned from German prototypes informed engine reliability improvements, aerodynamic refinements, and tactical doctrines. Engineers who had once struggled under the pressures of scarcity now worked with abundant resources, translating wartime ingenuity into peacetime innovation. The speed with which the Allies assimilated German knowledge underscored a fundamental truth. In aviation, knowledge without production is incomplete, but production informed by knowledge is transformative. German scientists, meanwhile, faced a complex legacy. Operation Paperclip transported many to the United States, where they became instrumental in jet propulsion development, missile technology, and the emerging Cold War arms race. Others remained in Europe, contributing to nascent aviation industries in Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The collective expertise, once harnessed for a collapsing war effort, now fueled a global technological renaissance. Strategically, the post-war analysis revealed the cost of misjudgment. German assumptions about American industrial limitations had blinded them to the true pace of innovation. Intelligence gaps, underestimated production capacities, and overconfidence in technical superiority had allowed the Allies to leapfrog into operational jet aviation. Reports emphasize that victory in future conflicts would hinge not solely on invention, but on the capacity to deploy, sustain, and adapt technology under real-world conditions. The legacy of this realization extended beyond jets. It shaped doctrines, influenced Cold War military planning, and spurred a relentless focus on air superiority. The Me-262, the XP-59, and the P-80 were more than machines. They were symbols of a turning point where imagination met reality, and where the velocity of industrial and technological mobilization defined the outcome. By the late 1940s, runways across the United States hummed with jet activity. German designs had seeded a new era of aviation, yet the lessons remained clear. Technological brilliance must be matched with strategic foresight, industrial scale, and timing. What had once seemed impossible over Piedmont and Berlin now shaped the skies over the emerging world order. The shock that German scientists had felt watching America's jets rise from concept to reality had transformed into a lesson written across history, one that would guide engineers, strategists, and nations for decades to come. The moment of disbelief, once confined to cold German bunkers and snow-laden airfields, had rippled outward, altering the very course of aviation history. From these ruins, a new age of flight was born, and the echoes of that revelation would define the balance of power for the next generation. The war had ended, but the skies had forever changed. Jets no longer belonged to the imagination of engineers. They belonged to reality. German scientists, once confident in their unmatched innovations, had confronted the limits of brilliance when untethered from production, logistics, and strategy. Their disbelief at American jet progress was a mirror of the larger lesson. Technological mastery is only as powerful as the systems that sustain it. In the quiet of abandoned runways and captured laboratories, the future of flight took shape. The P-80 shooting star would evolve into a symbol of a new era, one where speed, altitude, and the edge of human ingenuity defined air power. The Me-262, though too late to save a crumbling Reich, had sown seeds of knowledge that would transcend borders and wars. Beyond the machines, the story is one of perception and timing. War is not fought on ideas alone, but on the capacity to act, to scale, to transform innovation into force. The shock felt by German scientists was not merely disappointment. It was a humbling proof that history favors those who combine intellect with industrial might, foresight with execution. And in those first dawn flights of jet fighters over Europe, the world glimpsed the future, a horizon where technology accelerates beyond expectation, where the imagination of a few can reshape the destiny of many, and where the lessons of disbelief carve the path for generations to come. The jets rose silently, leaving trails across the sky, white streaks of inevitability. They carried with them the triumph of ingenuity, the weight of missed opportunities, and a reminder that progress waits for no one.